Okay, welcome to another adventure with your spiritual journey. This is Dr. Bob Dove. We have what I consider to be a treasure of Pittsburgh with us today. And that's one thing I love about these podcasts. We find so many local treasures that are actually national and international treasures. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our guest. This is Dr. Sheila Collins, and her subject in general is grief. And she knows grief because she's lost a son to AIDS and a daughter to breast cancer. And these are experiences that she chronicled in her award-winning memoir, Warrior Mother, Fierce Love, Unbearable Loss, and the Rituals That Heal. And that was published by She Writes in 2013. Since then, she has become a grief advocate, an international speaker and consultant, and she's identified many artful ways grief transforms our hearts, our minds, and our souls. Her 40-year career as a therapist, professor of social work, and author has followed her experience as a professional dancer. I found that to be pretty fascinating. And this career includes wisdom gleaned from that career and has guided thousands of people through the tough challenges life handed them, inspiring them to turn grief into gift. She's also delighted audiences worldwide with demonstrations of how art-based expression, such as dance, storytelling, song, and music, I'm going to add poetry to that, can help anyone turn life's toughest challenges into growth. Her first book, revised in 2018 for a second edition, Still Point, a self-care playbook for caregivers to find ease and time to breathe and reclaim joy, co-authored with Christine Godero, has become the basis of a popular online course for family caregivers, school nurses, social activists, and other professional helpers. Now, this is really exciting to me. Her 2016 TEDx talk, When Death Threatens Someone We Love, Life Really Matters, offers a poignant perspective for anyone facing life-threatening illness and death. Sheila currently directs the Wing and a Prayer Pittsburgh Players, an InterPlay-based improvisational troupe that helps individuals and organizations to tell their stories in transforming ways and to accomplish their noble purposes. Sheila and her partner of 43 years, international consultant and leadership coach Richard Citron, live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That was a mouthful.
Yes.
But I'm impressed. So welcome, Sheila.
Wow.
We're going to deviate a little bit from our typical format at Sheila's suggestion because she has so much to share with us that we're going to do this in 3 segments. The first segment will be just her personal spiritual journey from childhood till now. The second will deal with her books. And the third then will provide us all with that Sheila wisdom. So without further ado, the microphone's yours, Sheila.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bob. I just, I feel so blessed to be able to be here. And I agree with you. Pittsburgh is an amazing place. I'm not born here, but I have loved that I I've loved that I got to come. And I have to say, when we came, we didn't know anyone. We didn't even know anyone who had ever been here. So
Oh, my.
that was we just had to have it be an adventure, and it certainly has turned out that way. So so I guess I would begin with when I was born and the circumstances of that. I was living in my family were living in Evanston, Illinois. It was July 14th, which you may or may not know is the storming of the Bastille Day in France. Mm-hmm. And that has not been lost on me in my life, that I came into the world on the day that they celebrate the breaking in of a prison to get people out. And I look back on my life and see the work I've done in women's prisons, and I kind of laugh about whether that's, I don't know. I mean, we don't know. The other thing I think is important to mention is that the year was 1939. And so this was at a time when Hitler's armies were crossing Europe. Now, of course, I didn't know this, and my parents probably didn't even, bother about that. But later they did, because then I had uncles and aunts who were in the war as military people, and my father, because of his job, he was not in the military, but he was he came an air raid warden. And one of my earliest memories is that you have to turn the lights out and pull the shades down, and then he would go out into the darkness. And I just kind of remember it was scary. Yeah. It was scary. So So then, the other thing that I think is important to say about, to know about me is that I am a product of a mixed marriage. So how that is that my mother was raised by her Irish grandmother, who was an immigrant, recent immigrant from Ireland. And my father, his family had been here longer, but his family were from Northern Ireland. Protestant. So again, when I learned more about the history of it all, I kind of laugh and say, well, we had some of the troubles in our family too. But what I think is the notion that my father was, his background, he was more likely to go fishing and miss Sunday school than not. And we must forgive that because he was an orphan and raised by his older brothers and sisters. So they would send him off to the church, but I don't think he got there very often. So that was two opposites, you might say, in a way. And but my father was a good man. He really promised that he would raise us as Catholic, and which also in those days meant paying the tuition for Catholic schools. So my 13 years of Catholic school, we can credit my father's, determination to honor his pledge. And then the other part that's kind of important to know is that my mother, the priest, had said to her in this counseling that goes on before marriage, you should never discuss religion with your husband because he was a debater. He was on the debating team in Purdue. So you will never win this argument. So do not discuss this. So that was like a forbidden topic. They couldn't, but my father was interested in talking about it. So the routine was he would listen to our spelling words and our catechism answers, and then he would raise issues with me. And then I would go back to the sisters, and I would raise my hand, and I would say, what about this? And then they would tell me, and then I would go back. So I credit him with that notion of looking at things, understanding them at a deeper level. And actually the sisters were very good about, because the class was more interesting since my father's questions were in it. So, yeah. So
it's good that they answered your questions rather than just saying, shut up and listen.
Right, right. Well, because the difference, if you don't know this, but if you're an Irish Catholic, that's a version. There's an Italian version. There's a Polish version. We have all of that in Pittsburgh here because we have so many different cultures. But there's a different way that people do that, those rules or whatever. And for my mother, if the priest said it, you do it and you do not question. And so, like, an example would be that when I married for the second time, which is, of course, not permitted, she went to the priest to see if she could attend the marriage. And he said to her, well, would it stop the wedding if you didn't go? And she said, oh, no, they're going to do. Well, he said, then go and enjoy your daughter's wedding. So that was the kind of, boundary there. So then the next thing I think I need to mention in terms of my spiritual life is that my mother introduced me at a very young age to dance. And this was a love that she had that she wasn't permitted because her mother made her take piano lessons instead. So when she got a daughter, and she put me in dance as soon as I could walk, practically. I was 3 when I first started. And of course, I loved it. And through the years, she supported me to continue learning all the different things that, the years that it takes to develop that skill. And so I think that she was great all the way up to when I had to leave town and go to New York and, travel with all these people in the theater. And she was pretty scared about that. But she did keep a scrapbook, so I still have the scrapbook of anything that I did in my professional career. So, and of course, she didn't really recognize what an impact that was going to have on me in my spiritual life. So one of the things that dancers know about is ritual, and we know that you become what you do. You become what you do. So you have to be careful what kind of rituals you do. So, but my introduction to one that still stands out for me is I was 5 years old, and my youngest sister was born. And so she was my parents' 4th child, and she was very, very ill and not expected to live. So my mother did what a Catholic mother would do. She would go to the church and she would light candles, and I would go with her. And I don't know how often, but quite often we did this. And so we would pray for my sister, and my mother would cry, and we would light the candles. So I see that as the beginning for me of understanding that sort of connection to ritual and symbol and light and the church building, which was an art piece, absolute art piece. And many years later, when my daughter was being treated for breast cancer and it wasn't working, and so my husband and I happened to be in Europe and on a tour, and we went to so many churches and chapels, and we never passed one that we didn't go in and light some candles.
There are a lot of churches in Europe.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
And, that's for sure. And my special interest at the time was in the Black Madonna, where those were all over Europe, and often in little corners of the church or something. And the Black Madonna, which some would say is the message of Mother Nature, the earth of Mother Nature. And so anyway, that was a part of that, having started that with my mother and then continuing it. Okay, so it would probably not surprise you to know that my first husband, I fell in love with a man who was Protestant. So, of course. And so I was on tour at the time before we got married. And so he, of course, had to take the lessons, at the church. And he had a friend who was a Catholic. So I think this young man went with him to have the classes. And lo and behold, he converts to Catholicism, which my mother is ecstatic about.
Yeah,
because
sure.
she had prayed all these, and we all prayed. In fact, you see, we had to pray for my father to convert because he might not be able to get in heaven if he wasn't
Of course.
converted,
Of
right?
course not. Right.
Oh, my goodness. So now in this case, my husband's mother she was Presbyterian, and she was not pleased with this. However, she did say, well, I certainly am glad he found God. So,
Yeah,
so in that
wherever
sense,
it happened.
wherever it happens. I think she had given up on her son, so she was glad that he was in something, right?
Yeah.
So, but in that case, my husband was a news broadcaster, and we were very involved in social action kinds of things. And in the church, when the church opened up the windows and doors in Vatican II, where it was encouraged to be with people who were not in your religious version, your version of Christianity, then we did quite a bit with that. And it was a rich experience. My sister had become a member of the Grail, which is a international women's organization that began in Europe and then came here. The Grailville is in Ohio, not that far from where we are now. And so my sister was she hadn't been in college or anything. She went there and became like an intern, I guess. And they gave her all kinds of jobs. Like one of her jobs was in the summer, she started a school for migrants in Michigan, as the migrants come up the stream doing their picking of the different crops. The kids, of course, don't often get to go to school. So she was responsible for doing that. And that connected us to Mexican and Mexican-American people. And so we became involved in what was then the Cursillo movement. I'm sure it still is the Cursillo movement. But my sister and I, we're young women in our 20s, and we end up running these or leading these Cursillo movements. Classes they were retreats for women. And the notion of them were that how do you live your religion? And of course, they were most of them double our age, but they were so encouraging to us. And that was one of the ones that when I was looking at wanting to go back to school, one of the women who had a whole bunch of kids, she said, "Oh, go back while they're little. At least you know where they are." So, when they get to be teenagers, it's hard to keep track. So that was a very special experience of leading me, into how do you live these principles. So then it probably wouldn't surprise you that my second husband was Jewish. Now, he was not very connected. I mean, he had been bar mitzvahed, but the family they were very proud of being Jewish, and Judaism was a part of their lifestyle, but they weren't that,
They weren't Orthodox.
Well, that's for sure not Orthodox.
Yeah.
And so, and again, they were not pleased that he was going to be connected with somebody like me. And my family were not that excited either. Right. But I think that we used to laugh because at the time, my dance had taken me into the Jewish Community Center, and I was the founding member of a dance company out of that center where we danced in churches and synagogues.
Okay.
And I taught at the center. So in some ways, I knew more about Judaism by this time than he did. So, but it doesn't count exactly. And I came to understand why, because in a group of a minority group, when people marry outside of that group, it takes the members away, and it takes usually the children away. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Catholics had it where they made you promise,
Yeah.
but to keep the integrity of the group. So I think where I am now is to tell you one of the first powerful spiritual experiences I had in dance. So our piece that we did quite often, and we did it in different churches, and we did it on stage and that kind of thing. It was Make a Joyful Noise is the name of the piece, and it's Leonard Bernstein, and it's based on the Psalms. And part of the music is sung in Hebrew. So when we did it originally, we did it live, with that. Yeah. But then later we had the recording, which we used. But we went into churches and synagogues. So this particular time, we were in a Protestant church, I know, because I remember that long aisle, And one of our members at that time was in Israel, and there was a war. Now, this is, of course, before you have, cell phone information to tell you what's going on. So we didn't know. We just knew she was over there. And we didn't know. It's now called the 3-Day War. We didn't know it was going to end that fast. But anyway, we were very worried about her, and as we were doing this. So we made a circle, the group, and we held hands, and we said a prayer for her. And for all the people that would be connected to or impacted by that war. And then we did what we always did. Well, the way I describe it now and the way I understand it is I did not dance that dance. The dance danced me. And that was so it was like it's just happening. It's just unfolding. It's just unfolding from inside. The energy is just coming from inside of me. Uh-huh. Well, obviously, that's a transformational experience that I have a nodal one for my entire life, and I've even seen it now more as a metaphor, perhaps, of when we are at our best and when we are being ourselves, when we are moving from our souls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then another group, many of my experiences are group experiences because I believe that there's an African saying, I am because you are. So that notion of the people that I have been connected to and what they have given to me, and I to them perhaps too. But anyway, when I moved to Texas, I became involved with a organization called the Fellowship of Comparative Religions, and it was headed by a woman, Glenda Taylor, who was Native American, and she started doing retreats for women. She had a retreat center, and she started doing retreats for women. Now, this is 1991, I'm guessing. And so I've been a member of this group for over 30 years. We would hold ceremonies and get together in spring and fall and winter and summer, the seasons. Yeah. So, and we would bring to the meeting whatever, the way I would say it, whatever's up, So it could be that somebody is, in their last hours, or it could be a baby's coming in, or whatever it is, but you put it on the altar and we do ceremony with it. So one of the experiences that I want to talk about today is my son. As he was dealing with AIDS. He was doing pretty well at the time, but we would put the pictures of our grandkids and people we were praying for. We would put it on the altar, mm-hmm. and I had just come back from California, so I had some wonderful music from the Glide Memorial Chapel choir, and I still remember it. The music was God is good, God is good, God is good to me. And so I was dancing to that as a way of sharing it, as a way of praying. And out of the corner of my eye, I see my son's picture. So I just pick it up. And so the finale of my dance is I'm dancing with my son. So one of the women says, well, you've just demonstrated my religion. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I'm a Sufi, and we are taught whatever life hands you, You pick it up and dance with it. So that had set me on a path, as you can imagine, and to teach that to other people, or to let them know that that is a possibility. It is one of the possibilities. One of the possibilities. Then the other thing that I guess, if I look at these transformational experiences that were given, I think it was when my son was dying, and my other son was with me, and we were in our home. It was the living room that we turned into the dining room, and it had a very high ceiling, as Texas houses sometimes do, and so we were sitting there, and my son, Kevin, my son, said, "I don't even have to look behind what's happening. I can feel it. Ken's spirit is getting too big for his body. It's filling this room." And as soon as he said that, I felt it too. This incredible, energy is the only thing I know to say to it. It was in there. It was, and so what I did, the impulse was, I shuddered and I just took it in. I took it in. And then the weirdest thing, Bob, I'm telling you, you've probably heard the expression, peace that passes all understanding.
Sure.
Well, I had never understood that. I'd never had that. And of course, my brain is saying to me, Sheila, your son is dying. How can you feel this? It wasn't up for a vote. It was just happening. It was just happening. And so it was funny when the Warrior Mother book was about to be published, I had this story in the book, and I thought, gosh, I wonder if scientists has anybody else ever had this? Because here's one of the problems with this grief thing is people don't talk about it, so other people don't, know if what they're having is, how many other people might have that. So, so I found out that there was a name for it. But I did. I went to the Encyclopedia of Death and Dying, Googled it. And it mentioned, and it said, well, it's, it's not, we don't have scientific evidence, but there are many stories that people say about these kinds of experiences. They called it an energy transfer from the person leaving to their closest connection. So, you can see even by my telling you this, I can go to that place. From a part of my grief for my son has been having that experience and knowing that we are still connected. We are. I don't understand it exactly, but it passes understanding, right? We could, and that thing between my parents, where my father's trying to understand and my mother's totally accepting anything and don't even ask any questions. I'm trying to find some kind of middle here, I think, with the whole business, So
If you're still working on that, there is a book called The Energy Codes.
Oh, Energy Codes? Yes.
Energy Codes by Dr. Sue Morter.
Okay. Well, good.
And
See,
you'll find some of that.
Get some more information about that. I love that. Yeah. So then I guess you mentioned in your introduction, you mentioned the interplay, and certainly that has put me. One of the things that fascinates me is how we have these chance encounters. My first book was it was titled Still Point: The Dance of Self-Caring, Self-Healing. And this was at a time when the notion of self-care was not understood or permitted, really. So my husband, fortunately, came up with a concept. So I have it on the back of this book. Self-caring is a place halfway between selfless, and selfish. Between the saint that only regards for others and the sinner who only cares about themselves, self-care is a place for regular people. And this was inspired by my work with a woman, actually one of my teachers who just died recently, Ilana Rubenfeld. And she was a musician who had problems with her shoulders and her back, and she was trying to find a solution. She went to different places. She went to a therapist where you talk about it. No touching, just talking. And then she was Alexander is a system an English system that we have too, where they touch, no talking, just touching. So she thought if you put the two things together, what would happen if you could, have relaxation and touching and moving and talking? This would be. So that was her system, the Rubenfeld Synergy Method. And so she came into my life when I was a professor at the university, and I was working on helping with some kind of a presentation. And she was the presenter,
Now, which university was
that? At that point, I was in Nebraska. At that point, I was in Nebraska. Yeah. So Ilana came out with, it was, like the Human Potential Movement or something, and they had 4 presenters, 3 guys and Ilana. And she sparkled. While they were busy beating their chests and, all of that, she was this just beautiful, I wish I had the words for her receptivity, her, gracefulness, and how she would set things up so that a person could let whatever their experience was be there, own it, have it, and not try to change it yet. Let's just have it. Let's just know what it is, So, and I ended up taking her to the airport. We were volunteers, so and so that's how I got to. And I was very happy I didn't have to take the gentlemen. I didn't have as many positive things to say about them as I had about her. So, and then I don't know, a month later or 2 months, I don't even know. I'm in Dallas somewhere, going up an escalator, and she's coming down the other side. I mean, I just, So that's how I got involved with her and on her team, and she and I attempted, because what I was attracted to about her work was the self-care that she taught. And so we tried to work together to do a book, and it didn't work. It just, eventually we had to get a divorce on our, she was a very, she needed to do her own book. And so I took the piles of things that she didn't think fit in the book, and I created my book. So that's what this, that's what this book turned out to be. But anyway, when I was promoting that book, I was in California and at the Pacific School of Religion, and as I came out of the door of the studio, there was this sign of, free cats and do you need a ride to San Francisco kind of sign. And here was this graphic of Cynthia Winton Henry, a dancer, and Phil Porter. Phil Porter was the graphic artist and dancer who had done this. They are the founders of InterPlay. So I was, again, just so drawn to her, and I thought, I want to meet this woman. The people said, well, she teaches here, but she's not on campus. So I found a way to connect with her, and for the whole year, we wrote to one another. This is, of course, pre-emails and those kind of things, right? It was an old-fashioned, pen pal arrangement. She was the president of the Sacred Dance Guild, which was an organization that promoted and supported people using dance as a part of worship. And she asked me to come and present then from, that year. So that's when I met her and and boy, the rest is history, because that's been 30 years. So I met she and Phil, and my husband and I both started learning this notion of playing with your life, not just slogging through it, and using the arts, which just fit so beautifully for me. When we had, my husband and I at one time had a behavioral health care clinic in Texas, and we got to design it the way we wanted, and we had a movement room. And so, of course, I did what would be called, I guess, dance therapy with people. But, we would do enactments, we would do things instead of just talking about them. Right. So anyway, so that's how my work became so much of using the tools of interplay and teaching people to overcome the fact that, of course, you don't think you can dance, or you don't like your voice, or whatever it is, all this. Yeah. Let's not compare ourselves to people who, I remind people, when I was dancing professionally, I danced 8 hours a day. Now, you probably haven't been doing anything 8 hours a day lately,
Well, sleeping.
Sleeping would be good, yes. But so you can't compare yourself to people that are, doing it at that level. Uh-huh. But however, we in Interplay say these are birthright practices. Our ancestors, wherever they're from, they danced, they sang, they told stories. That's how they made it through tough stuff. That's how they supported one another. And it's just it's not good to have that taken away from us.
Right.
Yeah. So that has made a huge difference in my life. So, the Warrior Mother book is here's the newer book. This is the newer version of what happened. What happened is that the book, the Still Point book, originally was not a big seller, you could say, and so it didn't. And I just kind of forgot about it. And when I one of my friends who's a social worker and who's also in the women's group, she said, "You're forgetting about your book. You really need to go back to it, because it's really now people are catching up with this notion, And there's now so many people who are caregivers, whether they wanted to be or not, they are. So I started to rewrite it, to update it, and it was just painful, because I had become a better writer by that time, and I was changing every sentence. So Christine, people would say to her, "Well, when are you going to do your book?" And she would say, "Well, I don't know. Spirit hasn't told me yet. Spirit hasn't told me yet." So I had a dream one night, and I woke up and I thought, this would be really fun to do if Christine would do it with me. So I asked her, and I said, "Now think about this, because it's a big job to redo a book, but I would have you as a co-author." She said, "I don't have to think about this for a second." So then we laughed about. I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe Spirit told me what your next book was going to be." Because sometimes we tease about this in our women's group, but sometimes the way we describe it is sometimes we dream for one another. It's like, I'm not sure if this is my dream, if this is for me or for you.
Yeah.
that connection, Mm-hmm. So.
Well, I'm a strong believer in the fact that we're all one. So.
Yes.
That's part of that oneness.
That oneness, absolutely. That oneness. Yes. So the Warrior Mother book, which is, again, it was well received, I would say, good reviews, but it's here's what I've come up with. It takes a village to write a book, and it takes a village to get it out. It might not even be the same village. I don't know. But, so what I'm doing now for my next book, because it was really in trying to get out the Warrior Mother book that I really saw what is the matter with our culture. I mean, I kept running into it all the time. The notion of people's discomfort, people's not knowing how to deal with it, a lot of avoidance, a lot of feeling bad about. People would say, I did some performing of the book. That's how I was initially trying to get it out. We were, a group of us interplay people got involved in the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh. We have a community of people who are interplayers in Scotland. And so they invited us to come and be a part of the Fringe Festival. And so we came, and it was at the same time that Warrior Mother book was just released. So the person that was helping me get it out said, "Well, you gotta present there. You gotta find a way to do that." And of course, I mean, nobody knows me, so I have to figure out a way to do this that would be intriguing. So I tell the people at this book festival, which went along with the festival in Edinburgh, I tell her that we're going to perform my book instead of just having me read from it. That I'll meet with these people from around the world, and they will join me, and I'll read a little excerpt, and then they will respond with whatever part of their story meets with mine or connects with mine. So we did that. It was amazing and fun, and because they know the forms. So you just know the form. So if I say the form, here's the form we're going to do. And that's the agreement. But in that container, you put your own information. So we did this. I did it back here in Pittsburgh. We did one there. We've done it a lot of different places. So that notion of performing books, bringing them alive, to have the connection. Because one of the things that all artists want is we want to connect. We're doing this to connect, and we want to know how does this hit you, Bob? What do you think? So that that has been, and I'm certainly planning to do that with my new with the upcoming book. But then I recognized, okay, look, grieving is something you're going to be needing to do your entire life, and we might as well get good at it. And there are skills. And the biggest thing that, looking at my own experience that was helpful, besides the community of women, is the arts. And the expression of, you mentioned poetry, that's, of course, some of I always say I'm not a poet, but, like people say I'm not a dancer. We have to give that little coda there before we do it. But yeah, just the notion of the inspiration that comes from the arts, the connection that it makes to a different part of our brain. And so in my book, I'm looking at what does music do and what does dance do and what is, what kind of changes does it bring to us? And these are portals for us to come in. They are portals. Yes. So to connect that with the tough stuff and the sorrow and all that.
So we're at 5 minutes left.
Oh, my goodness.
Time.
Oh, my goodness.
So do you want to mention your newest book that's...
Well, this will be The Art of Grieving, How Art and Art Making Help Us to Live Our Best Lives Now. Okay. So that is what's coming up, and I'm hoping to have that out. I would like to invite people, if they want to be a part of the process, because we're in the process of getting feedback from people. If you go to the artofgrieving.us, then you can sign up to get some of the excerpts of the book, or if there's something we're looking at that we want feedback on as we develop, as we get into the final stretch here,
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've warned you that as we come to the close of our show, I'm going to ask you to leave some words of wisdom with our audience. So,
well,
I know you have lots.
Well, it's just
I've read some of your words of wisdom on your site. So,
well, one of the practices in InterPlay is the 3-sentence story. So it's good to learn about brevity, and I think that's part of poetry too. You get to the right word, right? So, So of course, the first thing I would have to say is keep moving. Our bodies are built to move. If we don't move, it's not a good thing. And the first, I always think about she was the editor for my first book, and she said to me, you got to pump on your heart, but everything else, your lymph system, your digestive system, your elimination system, everything else moves around when you do. So I tell people this a lot. So when people say, well, you don't look your age, listen, keep moving. That's it. Keep moving. And keep the grief moving too. Keep the grief moving. The other thing I think is the notion of playing with things and just instead of being so incredibly serious about it, because we can play with pretty tough stuff and find some things. And then I guess what I would sort of finish with the notion of, I think about this, there are 3 prayers that you can pray. And the first one, of course, is help. And that was the prayer that my mother said, please help my daughter. I said this to help my daughter. We pray for help. And sometimes the prayers are answered, although my daughter informed me all prayers are answered. Sometimes the answer is no.
Right.
So there you go. So that notion of help. Then the second one, of course, which the Native Americans have mastered for sure, is gratitude and thank you. Thank you for what I have now. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this day. And there's all kinds of research on the value of that health-wise, to be in that place, that prayer. But then the final one, which I think has been happening for me more and more as I'm doing more with art and with grief, is wow. That's the third prayer. Wow. Wow. So I guess I wish everybody all of that. All of it.
Help, thank you, and wow. Well, I've been wowed by your story. I didn't get to ask you any questions.
Oh, yeah.
So that sounds like we need to have you back after this latest book comes out. It's been so nice to have you with us and to just hear about your life. It's just been quite an adventure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is so wonderful to have this opportunity. I want to thank you so much.
Well, it's just part of the adventure, right?
Right.
Well, audience, until next time, remember that you've got to think about so much that you were exposed to today, and just take what resonates with you, and just discard the rest, although you may find later on that some of that rest comes to help. So until next time, this has been your spiritual journey. Thank you for being with us.